because you're thinking of hurting yourself or you're going crazy or whatever, something really overwhelming, psychiatrist or psychologist is just the ticket. But if it's something like I can't quite figure out what to do with myself and I feel like I'm, haven't found my true purpose and it's a sort of confusing topic and I don't know if any of my friends really want to hear it, then you should take it to a friend because probably they do want to hear it and they want to talk to you about their sense of purpose and whether they have enough of it.
Dr. Olds, thank you so much for being here on the show. I'm very excited to connect with you. So thanks for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I am not necessarily an authority on the subject. I probably should have done some more research to confirm this. But I'm going to, on the purposes of this show where I don't have a fact checker, say that you might be one of the originals. You started talking about loneliness on both a systemic level and on a pretty individual level of how loneliness impacts us and our long-term health before this was a mainstream. I mean, I don't even know if it's a mainstream topic, but before it garnered a lot of the attention that it has currently. And even before, I was thinking about one of the books that feels like one of the more seminal early works of Bowling Alone. You wrote your first book on loneliness even before Robert Putnam's book came out. You didn't?
Well, that might be before his book, but actually, he had written a paper called Bowling Alone.
Okay.
And we did consult his paper.
Okay. So
but I think you're right that his whole book came out between our two books.
Yes. So one, I'm just always so curious. I love talking to people who have an ear to the ground and who are seeing things sometimes years, oftentimes decades before the rest of us catch up. So I'm curious, what was it for you that all those years ago when you wrote your first book about the topic, what were you seeing? What were you hearing? What was the context in which you started going, this doesn't feel like an isolated incident. There's something larger happening here, specifically here in America?
Well, first of all, as a psychiatrist, I get to hear from people of all ages and all walks of life. And even though people wouldn't come in and say, I'm coming here because I'm feeling incredibly isolated, it would emerge that they were. And that in a way, talking to a psychiatrist, which was a safe first move sometimes because you knew that psychiatrist wouldn't tell any of your secrets and you didn't have to take care of them. It was sort of a one-way street, but you could sort of get the habit of talking about yourself. Mm-hmm. And then as a psychiatrist, I wanted to keep making the point that yes, it feels better to talk to a psychiatrist, but you got to take that good feeling from divulging yourself and explaining yourself and take it out into the world so that you have some connections in the world with real people where you can reciprocate and hear what they have to say and say what's on your mind and your heart and not just talk to a doctor about it forever.
Okay. Wow. I have seen this increasing trend, even just anecdotally, in my friend groups and community, definitely like online. More and more people are seeking therapeutic support than ever before, right? Where it's like when my mom was my age, she did not have a single friend who was in therapy. And I would say anecdotally, at any given time, at least half of my friends are in therapy, myself included. And there is little to no shame involved. If anything, there might be some sense of like, totally. It's like it has completely flipped from something that you're ashamed of and put your hoodie up and hide as you go into your, to like now, it's like, oh, I just had this great, you were posting on Instagram, like just had a great session with my therapist. Okay. So it's completely shifted, which I think on a whole is beautiful progress. Great. But what I loved about what you phrased it as, this is practice. Like it's practice in being able to tell the full story of your life to another human. And it's practice because it's very safe. It's very safe because you are legally bound not to tell people secrets unless they're going to hurt themselves or others, right? So it's safe from kind of a confidentiality standpoint. You mentioned it's safe because of this kind of one-sided nature of like, I don't feel like I have to have another hour to be able to check up on Jacqueline and see how she's doing.
Right.
But one of the things that I've seen the third kind of safety that I've observed that I've also observed might have some negative consequences is that it's very safe in the sense that your psychologist, your therapist, your psychiatrist doesn't live with you. They're not friends with you. They don't observe you out in the real world. They don't experience being on the other side of you as a friend, as a partner, as a neighbor. And so I feel like I've seen this kind of subtle, almost like echo chamber that can get created in these clinical relationships where it's like, Sally is coming to her counselor with her
And she
version of
looks
the
like the
story.
sweetest person in the world, right?
Totally, totally. And Sally's telling the story about her narcissistic sister, Jane. And all the psychiatrist knows about Jane is through Sally,
She's
right?
awful.
And I think obviously the trained clinical professional understands this dynamic, but I think sometimes the patient doesn't, because what I have seen is it almost becomes now like the friends are being held to this standard that the therapist or the psychologist has
Totally.
set, where it's like, well, it feels a lot better when I tell my psychologist that they agree with me.
I know. No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I actually sometimes specify for people that even though it might feel good talking to a psychiatrist or me, they should bear in mind it's an incredibly artificial relationship
Wow.
and that they shouldn't hold that up as the ideal of what a relationship should be because it's completely one sided. And we were not meant to have one sided relationship.
I feel so much relief in hearing someone who this is your profession and knowing the influence that you have in the field. I had a situation several months ago where I literally had somebody say, I actually don't think we were following up on a subject that was causing some grief and heartache in this person's life. And he was like, I spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks talking to my therapist about it. I think I'm good. Like I got the feedback that I needed. And I will just say my heart kind of broke a little bit because I was just like, you probably did learn so much. You got so much practice. You probably got some really valuable feedback. But to leave it there in that room feels like, isn't the purpose that it helped give you the language so that so that you could take it out into your real life and now use those tools, those understandings to create more intimacy and depth in the relationships that I think long-term will be more responsible for your long-term mental health, your friends, than your therapist.
Totally. And you're not even paying for it. They're actually the only way in which you're paying for it is that you sometimes listen to them too.
That is very true. We go in on therapy together, like you're going to go figure this out and then bring it back to the group. And we're going to get the value from your therapist. That is actually a real net positive to when your friends are in therapy, when you're getting free secondhand therapy. I just love hearing that. Even just the simple way of going, this is a super important relationship. It can be an incredible tool, but it should lead you to taking what you've learned and taking it out into the real world, into the relationship with your partner, your spouse, your friends, and your colleagues, and that your relationship with your therapist long term, you should be able to see more intimacy, more connection, more vulnerability, more feedback happening outside of the office, if that is something that you're prioritizing.
It's true. And actually, my husband, who is also a psychiatrist, and I wrote a paper about 2.5 years ago, which had the unpopular title to other psychiatrists of, "Why don't you take this to a friend?"
Oh my gosh, I don't know how I missed that in my research about you, but I am immediately going to go look at that. So here's a question that to make this really practical. Let's make it into one of those flowchart games. Should I talk to my therapist or should I talk to my friends? How would you, as a licensed professional, encourage someone, I've got this problem, I've got this issue. Do I go find a therapist or is this something that I attempt to bring to my friends? What's some guidance you would give
Great
people?
Great question. If it is something that is so overwhelming that you would be terrified of telling your own partner practically about it because you're thinking of hurting yourself or you're going crazy or whatever, something really overwhelming, psychiatrist or psychologist is just the ticket. But if it's something like I can't quite figure out what to do with myself and I feel like I'm, haven't found my true purpose and it's a sort of confusing topic and I don't know if any of my friends really want to hear it, then you should take it to a friend because probably they do want to hear it and they want to talk to you about their sense of purpose and whether they have enough of it.
I love that. There's a clarity and simplicity to that that feels like there's an actual line here. Why are more and more and more people than ever finding therapists and investing in that relationship and not taking things? Sounds like a lot of things that you're like, actually, you should be talking to your
Take
friend
to a
about
friend.
this, not me. What's
Sure.
keeping them from doing that?
I think two things. First of all, in mainstream society now, if anybody hears from a friend that they're really going through a lot of distress and waking up in the middle of the night, they sort of think, the little light bulb about therapy goes off and they think, well, maybe you should take this to a therapist. I went to therapy and it was so helpful. Maybe you should too. So it's partly out of altruism that,
Sure.
People who have encountered therapy think it's good. But I think it's also that a lot of people don't trust themselves to give advice, that people are terrified. And the person who's talking about their problem is a little scared of gossip. That that friend will go to
Yeah.
the other friend and say, God, you won't believe how mixed up she is.
Yeah. 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 Confidentiality and trust. I just so often have this experience that I'm like, before I say something out loud, it feels so big and so heavy and maybe so like twisted. Usually 9 out of 10 times, maybe 95 out of 100 times after I say it, so much is released. Like it's just kind of like, okay, that actually wasn't as big of a deal as I thought it was now that I put actual English language words to it. But before we're on that side of sharing it, it can feel really big and scary. And I think it makes the possibility that someone won't treat those feelings, those concerns, those fears that you have, won't keep them confidential, won't treat them tenderly. That's really scary. That they'll judge us, that they'll reject us. I mean, you know a lot more about this than I do, but I read a study that showed that when they studied MRI scans of brains who were imagining physical assault. Like, so it's like, okay, imagine that you're, walking down the street and you get punched in the face. A certain part of your brain lights up with a certain degree of intensity. That the same part of your brain lights up with nearly the same degree of intensity when you imagine social rejection, when you imagine sharing something with somebody and them sharing it with somebody else or them judging you or rejecting you, that the fear of social rejection is basically the same as our fear of being physically assaulted.
And it really is incredible. And I read that too. It's absolutely amazing.
So I think acknowledging this is scary for everybody and it can help.
Totally scary.
Can help us feel a little bit more brave. But then the second thing that you mentioned was around the listener questioning
Giving good advice.
Yeah, can I give good advice? So what would you say to that?
I would say that probably the way we all, we cavemen and women learned to talk was so that we could help each other and compare notes and say, yeah, when you see a tiger, what do you do? To some extent, we needed to compare notes and give advice. And yes, sometimes the advice could be better, could be worse, but that is sort of what we do. We try to, compare our own experiences with those of the people we love and tell them as best we can what we think would be helpful. And nowadays, everybody goes to the internet as if somehow that was much better than a friend, or they go see a therapist. And it seems nuts to me when, we've specially chosen our friends because we think they have good heads on their shoulders.
Yeah, yeah. I also feel, and I'm curious if you would agree with this, I feel like small groups of multiple people who are committed to one another, meet consistently, are creating a space to share these important matters of the heart can also kind of be an unlock because it takes so much pressure off of any one individual person to like say the exact right thing in the moment. And I know when I share, which I do, I meet with the same group of women every single Wednesday night at 8 p.m. It's one of the most kind of sacred practices that I have. I don't ever miss it. Unless I'm like out of town or sick or something. And when I sit in this room and I share with, anywhere from 3 to 6 people, it's a committed group of people, but depending on how many, people are able to be there that week, the way that I feel held, because if I'm sharing something, someone always responds first. But then typically the rhythm is, and then that spurs on an idea that somebody else shares that might either back up the original feedback, which then just gives me more confidence that it's like, okay, they're clearly seeing something that I'm not seeing. I'm hearing now from multiple voices. But also, what happens is my friends are really different from one another, and the way that they show up and their shame stories that they have or their dynamics within their marriage are all unique and different. So then what will happen is then friend two shares something that friend one wouldn't have shared because that wasn't her lived experience, which then all of a sudden creates this just like more well-rounded. I just feel safe and I feel secure, and I feel like I will leave one of those nights being like, the likelihood that I'm missing something big is so small because those 4 women are all so smart and have different perspectives and all freely spoke to me. And it wasn't just this one-on-one interaction where I do feel like there can sometimes feel like there's just more pressure. Like, did I say the right thing? Was I empathetic enough? Did I challenge enough? All of those ways that we can kind of
You're
get in our
totally
heads.
right. Well, I think that is a brilliant point, and I've populated my life with a few of those kinds of groups too. For example, since I'm older, I have a grannies group,
Love.
and it's 4 or 6 other women, 3 of whom are a little bit older, 3 of whom are younger, and the older ones are from England, and the younger ones are from America. So it couldn't be more fascinating. And if you met any of these ladies, you'd say, oh, well, she doesn't have a worry in the world about being a granny. She's probably fantastic. But no, everybody has the same worries. They all want to do such a good job. And every now and then, they put their foot in it to say something terrible, and their daughter or their son gets furious. And it's just so fascinating and so helpful to me with this whole group.
I love it. I love that. Okay, so you talked about the fear of just confidence. Like, will my friends hold this in confidence? Will they treat it gently? We talked about kind of releasing ourselves from the fear of needing to be the most perfect, insightful. You said everything just as it could be. What I sensed in you and how I would reflect what I heard you saying is like, we're always kind of workshopping, and that's fine. Like, we don't have to be the like Buddha or whatever, and say the most perfect thing. Like, actually the help comes in just knowing the intention that you're surrounded by people who want to help and who are going to give you the time and energy. That's probably more important than them kind of saying something that
That's more important. And then there's that secret thing they often say, this happened to me too the other 3 weeks ago, and I can't tell you how awful it was, and I felt just like you did, and here's what I did about it, and it didn't work. Sometimes that's the most helpful, even though you don't have any advice.
Oh my gosh, that is so good. I think some of the most powerful words in the English language are just sitting across somebody, especially if it's a friend, because to your point, you chose your friends. So it's like, I think you're cool. I think you're smart. I think you're generally a lovely person to be around. So when you look at me and you say, me too, like, I've been there, I've done that, I felt that way, all of a sudden, this kind of like cosmic cognitive dissonance starts to occur where I go, wait a second. I think you're awesome. I think you're an amazing mom. I think you're a great friend. And you've done that before. Now, all of a sudden, the story I had about myself that I must just be a shitty person who does shitty things and can't keep her big, shitty mouth closed. I'm like, that you kind of question, you cause me to question that entire narrative because it can't be true for me, but also not true for you. And I certainly wouldn't say I just think you're a generally messed up person.
No, it's sometimes just comparing notes and finding out that your favorite people also get all screwed up over what they did or saw it or thought.
I love it.
It's very helpful.
I love it. Okay, well, let's kind of reverse engineer this a little bit in the sense that your most recent book, The Lonely American, really explores kind of the higher level, more kind of ideological or like systemic proclivities that we have as a country and as a nation that have led us to be where we are today. Could you speak into that a little bit? And if you had to kind of summarize, hey, America is pretty uniquely suited to be getting the results it's getting as it relates to loneliness and isolation. Will you share with us a little bit of your very research-backed findings and conclusions?
Well, at its simplest, uh, what we say in that book is that Americans come to this country often from other countries and have to break ties in order to do it.
Mm.
Whether they came in 1893 or they came in 1947, they had to separate from the old world and start anew. So they are tiebreakers already. And they came for a different culture where they would have freedom to say what they want, do what they want, do the job they wish to do, etc. And often they made a kind of religion slash culture out of being self-sufficient and individualistic and not being somebody who just toes the line and did it the way everybody else in the family did it in the old world. So once you have this culture where being your own person is really the ticket, then you start teaching it. Like you say to your children, you have to learn to live all by yourself before you could live with somebody else. Or you have to, expect to spend many years after college living on your own before you'll find your true love. And there are all sorts of things that go along with it that sort of make it seem like being on your own is just the ticket. When in fact, it's terrible for people. If you look at their medical measures, you look at anything that lets you kind of see how they're doing, they do much better when they've got company than when they're by themselves.
Will you share a little bit about, and I can't remember if it was in your, which book it was in, but the social experiment, if you will, of the town of Rosetto, and share a little bit about what that was and what the measurable impact of that experiment was?
Rosetto was a little town in Pennsylvania where many, many immigrants from a little town in Italy came right to Rosetto, and they named it Rosetto to show that it was an Italian town. And it was probably 90% immigrants from the same neck of the woods in Italy. So they knew each other, they knew each other's families, they lived in a very intermeshed way, kind of like your little village. And they were in and out of each other's houses. They knew each other well. They intermarried. It was like a little village in Italy right there in Pennsylvania. And by accident, some cardiologist stayed there and sort of in an informal way found out that none of them were having heart attacks or arteriosclerosis or any of the illnesses that we expected people to have in their late 60s and 70s. And they just weren't having it in Rosetto. So he decided to come back and do a whole study of the people in Rosetto. And he found that they were, in fact, much healthier in their cardiology, in their cardiac system. And he was delighted and when he tried to correct for how they ate or how they breathed or how much sports they did, the only thing that really was different about them from everybody else was they were very enmeshed and sort of in each other's lives. They all knew each other well. It was like a little village, and there was a kind of interconnection that we don't have in most American places. So then what was really kind of sad is that in the next generation, all the young people wanted to go out into the world and go away from the little village and, be true Americans and kind of succeed in their careers. And as they left and they settled somewhere else, they were followed medically. And it's turned out they started having the same cardiac illnesses that most Americans have, which they would have gotten out of if they just stayed in Rosetto.
The clearness of this physiological impact that has, that it was able to be measured because of this very unique situation. I just find that to be so compelling. And there's just this part of me that's like, how could you hear that? How could you read that? How could you know that and still be like, meh, I'm just going to do it this way? Like, it honestly is kind of like mind-boggling to me. But let's talk about why do you think the young people left? Why did they leave?
So we also have a society that's incredibly materialistic. And if you can sort of see your whole trajectory as you grow up and you know that, if you're lucky, you'll make 65,000 and you'll do just what your mother and father did. And they always were very happy and they lived long lives, but they were never rich. You think, gosh, I'm missing the American dream here. I want to be rich. And you can't necessarily do that in a tiny town with all the people you know best. They're not about to suddenly make you a millionaire when they're all making, sort of middle-class salaries. So I think people went off to seek their fortune.
Yeah.
And in America, maybe we pay too much attention to the monetary fortune and not enough to the sort of psychological fortune of having people you know and love all around you.
Which to me feels like such a tragedy because I think that about 90% of our desire for more wealth actually, it's like, is it that you just intrinsically love this car, this house, these clothes? Or is it that deep down you believe if you have the car, if you have the clothes, if you have the house, then
People will like you better.
you'll have love, you'll have respect, you'll have belonging, you'll have admiration. And it's just, I don't know if you've, this is, I might edit this out because it's going to be a rabbit trail, but I don't know if you've ever, are you a Jerry Seinfeld stand up fan?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever
Yeah.
heard the bit that he does about the racehorses? Where he
No.
okay, so he has this whole bit, I'm going to butcher it, but he has this whole bit that he does about being a racehorse, but it's from the racehorse's perspective. And there's this one horse who gets to the end of the race and is like, we're back where we started. Like, we could have just, if the whole point was to get here, we could have avoided all of this. And I almost kind of feel like American consumerism is the same. That it's like, oh, we run around, we search, we, run ourselves into the ground to get more, to get more, to get more. And it's all so that we can be more liked, be more loved, be more admired, be more respected. And it feels like one of the great unlocks is to just stay where you are and go like, actually, the admiration, the love, and the respect and the belonging, the psychological safety that comes
of familiarity.
Yes. Yes. And that comes from just like having a sense of belonging. Have you watched the most recent White Lotus season by any chance?
I did not.
Okay, I had to stop watching it actually after this most recent episode because I couldn't sleep afterwards. I felt it all way too deeply. So TBD on if I actually finished the season. But there was a moment where I was like, I have heard this is it. It felt like it was the dramatic portrayal of what I have felt from some of my clients. It was a middle-aged man, beautiful young adult family, very high powered, made a ton of money. He's at this resort in Thailand that he's taken his whole family, and I'm sure it's like $30,000 a night, like very extravagant. And this is a spoiler alert for anybody who wants to watch the season but hasn't yet. And he finds out that he's kind of caught up in some sort of illegal deal that he did is coming to the surface and that he's gonna lose it all. And literally he's like on the phone with his, I don't know, wealth manager or lawyer, somebody who's basically just being like, hey, it's not going to be that bad. You're only going to go to jail for like a year, but they're going to take everything that you have. And he becomes suicidal. And he is in this moment where he's contemplating taking his own life. And his wife walks in and she's like, are you okay? You're not acting yourself. And he like looks up at her and he's literally just has like sweat that is like pouring down his face. And he says something to the effect of like, does it ever occur to you how much expectation there is on me? Does it ever occur to you how much I am holding? And I started bawling, Jacqueline, because
I'm
I
so
am
sorry.
like, I have felt that with some of my clients, specifically men who are wealthy and who are very successful, of going like, I built this whole life up and now everyone expects that I'm going to be able to carry it forward
Forever.
into perpetuity. And there's no break.
Right.
And I've kind of created this machine and now it is all on me. And I had to turn it off. I had to turn it off.
I understand completely. It must have been just too real for words.
It was too real, but it does make me wonder. I mean, obviously to like varying degrees. I think that is something that is probably one of the downsides of American capitalism is just that machine that it creates. And once you achieve something, the idea of losing it becomes even more humiliating than having never got it in the first place.
I was reading about the guy who founded Patagonia this morning, Yves Chouinard. And they were saying that he still lives in his sort of little log cabin with using the same frying pan he used 50 years ago. And that he can't stand it if somebody calls him a billionaire. He is furious at them. And finally, he gave all his money into some trust so that he could give away his money so that he would not be distracted by money.
Wow. Wow. Will you talk to us a little bit about why, you had mentioned at the very beginning of our interview, you had said, I have these clients and they're coming in and what they're actually dealing with is loneliness and isolation, but it will take sometimes months to get there. And they are so quick to talk about anxiety or to talk about depression or to talk about anything else other than I'm experiencing loneliness and isolation. And I was really interested in hearing your kind of clinical viewpoint on that of what do you think is happening that makes it more socially acceptable or easier or less scary to say, hi, I'm Liz and I struggle with anxiety. And this is why I'm having all of these problems in my life. Than, hi, I'm Liz and I think I'm really lonely. And I don't think I
Lonely.
have good enough friends. And that's why I'm feeling all of these things in my life.
I think for decades and decades, admitting that you were lonely made you feel like you were admitting that you were a loser. It's sort of like when you're in seventh grade
Yeah.
and nobody will play with you. You know you don't get a. It's probably what all those adolescents who are on social media too much and see other people having parties where they're not invited feel like.
Totally.
And what you said about how social rejection can feel as bad as being beat up. That basically we don't really want to know that other people are having much more fun. And when you're lonely, you can't help but notice it and feel the lack in yourself. And sometimes what's interesting, and I wonder if this is why people are checking the box about loneliness so much more, is that even if you're not that lonely and you kind of keep yourself good company, if you think other people are having a much better time than you and you have lots of evidence, you could be unhappy with your state, even though you're not a person who wants to have 14 friends and, always be socially active. You love keeping yourself company. But it's, in a way, what's being written about can often have a big effect on all of us. But I do think that for a long time, nobody talked about loneliness. And so what we were trying to do was mention the fact that everybody feels lonely and left out some of the time.
That's so
You
good.
can't have a whole life without sometimes feeling lonely or sometimes feeling left out. And we wanted people to know that that was part of the ordinary course of things so they wouldn't feel so ashamed and embarrassed.
I love that. Vivek Murthy, who is the former U.S. Surgeon General who made a big part of his time around loneliness and isolation, had a quote that I've now repeated so much that says, loneliness is not an accusation of your unworthiness. It's simply a signal. And reframing this idea that loneliness is not much different than hunger or thirst, right? Like our bodies were designed to get a certain amount of water, nutrients, and social connection. And when any of those kind of fall below where they need to be, our body, which I think is brilliant design, sends us a signal that's like, hey, it's time to
Yeah.
prioritize water. It's time to prioritize, finding food. It's time to prioritize
Finding
relationships. And
friends.
yet it is interesting that I've never met somebody who's thirsty and who's like feels ashamed about it and is beating themselves up. But loneliness carries such a psychological
Stigma.
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 And it's part of the reason that I'm so grateful for you and your work in the world to
Thank
do
you.
that and to make it like any other part of our health. It is something that we require, and therefore it requires of us that there's a degree of prioritizing, making sure we have consistent access to that thing. Speaking of making choices in our own life, will you talk to us a little bit more about what your first book was centered on, kind of the more practical worm's eye view,
Moves.
if you will, of like what are some practical things that we can do to, one, even just have more agency. I think one of the things that scares me the most about where we're at in culture right now is I meet a lot of people that think being lonely and not having friends and being too busy is just normal. So there's kind of this giving up of like, this is just what it's like to be an adult and we're all suffering through it. And so, one, what can we do to inspire people to have more agency? Like, no, if you're lonely, there are actually things that you can do. And two, what are some of those things?
Great question. Well, first of all, I think what we said in that first book was that if you have a mutual project or activity that you do with other people on a regular basis, they will over time become friends, even if you try not to let them become friends. The fact is, if you see people regularly and you get used to them, chances are 8 out of 10 that you're going to get to like them a little bit and they'll get to like you back. So it's not like you have to go out there and be, you know, Miss Conviviality. You can just be yourself and join a few things that happen regularly. And back when we were writing that book, we had kids in the school district, and I was talking about things like carpools, and sometimes on vacations, because my husband and I were both doctors and we didn't have a regular babysitter, we would form something called neighborhood camp, where we took off half of all the school vacations, but there were millions of school vacations and they were very long. So we would take off, let's say it was 2 weeks of spring vacation and we could only take off 1 week. We'd have 1 week where I organized neighborhood camp. And so for about 4 families with kids of different ages, we'd hire 2 teenage girls and they would come and plan basically a little camp for a week in everybody's houses. And the kids had a blast. They were all going to different schools, but it didn't matter because they'd known each other since childhood. And it was sort of this way of weaving kids together in a world where kids didn't just form posses out on the street and go play.
I love that. I love
So those were the kinds of things that kept the families linked up. They kept the kids in good communication. And yeah, it was fantastic.
Brilliant. To circle back to kind of what you talked about before, I think the term is exposure bias, right? Where there is this idea that we need to go find our best friend. And I actually kind of feel guilty because I met someone later in life, a friend. It was actually through a business transaction. We merged our companies together. And the only reason we were able to merge our companies together is because we had built, as founders, very similar companies. And it turns out if you look at two very similar companies and you trace it back to the founders, there's a likelihood that they're the same in some kind of unique ways. So we formed this late in life and friendship, and I would say she is one of my best friends. But I actually have been kind of thinking lately. I'm like, I feel a little bit. Guilty's probably too strong of a word, but I hope I didn't subtly contribute to the best friend as soulmate myth that I feel like happens specifically in American culture right now, that it's like finding your person who's your magical other half, who happens to either be so similar to you or perfectly different than you in all of the right ways that you can finish each other's sentences and blah, 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 blah. I feel like if that happens, that's amazing. That's great. That's such a gift. Yay. But also, we don't need to go find the cosmic other half best friend in order to start receiving these benefits. And to your point, oftentimes we just become friends with who are around us. And I wish we had more expectation towards that. Like, I think that we've kind of entered into this more of designer curated era where it's like all of your people need to be perfectly chosen and perfectly suited to you. And I feel like that's setting people up for failure. And the exposure bias thing, I remember reading a study they were measuring closeness of relationships. It were people that were in the Air Force or the police academy or something. And they were interviewing folks who had formed really close friendships and trying to figure out, how did this happen? How did these, the depth of this relationship occur? And one of the I think it was the single most powerful indicator that they found is that their last names started with the same letter. And that meant that for the years that they were in school, they were most often in line with this person or sat next to this person, or their desks were situated. And so it's like, it wasn't actually even this magical, mystical, cosmic, we just love everything about each other. It's like, you're who's here and you're what I got. And so
it's really true. It's why college kids, when you find out who did they stay in touch with all their life, it was usually somebody who lived on the same corridor or their roommate. It's just too much of a coincidence that everybody just happens to make very good friends with who's there.
It's too much. We can't ignore it. Okay. My last question relates to the neighborhood camp idea, which I love. First of all, I think most parents know, and I don't know why we don't lean into this more. This is a real key kind of function or thesis of our little village, is that it's not harder by more than a few percentage points for me to watch 6 kids in my backyard than it is for me to watch my 3 kids in the backyard.
Yeah.
Arguably, sometimes it actually becomes easier because there are new dynamics
Yeah.
and the two older can kind of pair off. And so they're no longer being too rough with the youngers, which cause the conflict because they can just wrestle with each other. So sometimes it actually becomes easier. If it's harder, it's not harder by more than a few percentage points. This is now I'm at home, I'm watching kids, I'm getting snacks, whatever, whether I'm
Yeah.
doing it for 3 or for 8, this is the deal. So one, there's just like an economies of scale that I feel like we need to lean into. But something that I feel like comes up for a lot of Americans when they think about kind of institutionalizing helping one another more, that I hear is we are deathly afraid of being obligated, of creating something
So
where
true.
now there is some sort of expectation or some sort of obligation. I said yes once. You are going to take advantage of that. You're going to exploit that. Now I'm not going to be able to say no next time. Will you speak a little bit to what I have found to be a pretty like uniquely American phenomenon of phobia of expectation or phobia of obligation, and why that exists and the impact that you feel like it's having on even a cultural level?
Well, that's so interesting. And we have written about that a little bit. In the old world, interdependency was the way to go. You know, there's even some unsavory expressions like he scratched, you scratched my back, I'll scratch your back, which sort of sounds like it's ever so slightly corrupt. But in fact, when people help each other, they are obligated to one another. And that obligation is a kind of invisible thread that holds people together, even in rough
Mm,
times. And, when you think about your relatives, maybe you didn't love going to see Aunt Sadie once a month because sometimes they said the same thing over and over again. But it was part of what made your life rich that Aunt
mm,
Sadie was somebody you helped take care of.
mm,
And so all these little obligations are part of why some people seem to have rich lives and other people feel that they have poor lives. The fear of obligation can leave you bereft. You have no sense of purpose that somebody needs you, and you would never ask a favor for fear that they'd hold it against you. You'd be seen as a dependent kind of person who couldn't do everything for yourself. So people are extremely prone, just as you say, to doing everything for themselves and not being obligated.
mm,
And they're cheating themselves out of what makes life rich and full of a sense of purpose.
It's so good. When you talked about the example of going to visit Aunt Sally, who just tells the same stories over and over again, and it's kind of annoying and not how you want to spend your Saturday afternoon, I do just have to wonder. It's like, what is subtly happening in the human psyche where even as a teenager or a young adult, you're visiting your old Aunt Sally. It's kind of a bummer. But deep down, is it actually creating this narrative that it's like, when I'm old and when I'm telling the same stories over and over again, I'm not going to be alone because some
I know.
youngin is going to feel obligated to come spend their Saturday afternoon with me.
That's
And
true.
just like the level of deep comfort that that would give us as a human. I also do feel like this is where the need for the village and kind of, we talked about the power and kind of magic of a group dynamic when it comes to like a small group where you're sharing your kind of intimate secrets and thoughts and shames with one another, that a group can really just help relieve some of that pressure. But I also feel like this is a conversation, or this is a context, the more practical we need to be able to help each other, where, not to be trite, but where the village really does matter. Because it's like, if there's one other family that you feel that sense of like you help each other out in a pinch, the likelihood that they're asking for help at a time when you truly are like, I'm barely keeping my head above water, I can't even imagine helping you right now, is higher than like in my context, in my little village. We have a Slack channel, and I would say at least a few times a week somebody is putting something out on the Slack channel. It's like, I need help with this. Does anybody have an inflatable car seat? We're going on a trip. Can somebody pick us up at the airport? Can someone watch over the kids? I've got a late board meeting, whatever it is.
That is so great.
Constant
You really have created something wonderful.
this stream. But what is lovely about that is when I see a message come across, I don't feel guilty. I don't feel overwhelmed, because there truly is this sense of, if today happens to be a day where it won't be comfortable or easy, but I can manage to go out of my way to serve this person, I feel joy and delight in doing it. And also, if I can't, the likelihood that one of these 6 other families, if we're all coming to the table with that posture of like, when I can, I do, when I can't, I don't, just helps kind of create the sense of intensity that I think a lot of Americans imagine feeling, that it's like, this is all on you. And so if I ask you if you watch my kids and you can't, I don't know, would they think the world is going to end or the relationship is going to break or you're going to feel really bad about yourself. And that is another case, I feel like, for cultivating these kind of small groups of folks where the needs can kind of get diffused. And in the same way that it's like in marriage, where I think we both would agree that your spouse can't be everything to you. It's kind of the same in friends. Like we need.
I think so too. And I think you've really done something quite marvelous that you've got these 6 families who all help each other. That is incredible.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It has not been without a lot of work, but it is definitely probably been one of the highest returns of investment on any work that I've done in my life. And is very much so banking on that everything that you've shared with us in your body of work over the last, several decades is true. I'm believing you when you say this is one of the single best investments that we can make in our lives. I'm taking it to the bank, and here we go, building a life on it.
Well, you said read a wonderful book. There's a wonderful book by a friend of mine called Robert Waldinger called The Good Life. So he inherited some Harvard study that's looked at 75 years of both Harvard graduates and regular people who lived, over 75 years. And he looked to see what made them flourish, the ones who flourished most. And he really found that good relationships, not just with their own family, but with their friends, was what made the most successful group flourish the best. So you would love this book.
Taking it to the bank. Thank you so much, Dr. Olds. Thank you for your incredibly valuable time, for just the wealth of wisdom that you are having, such a long faithfulness of studying and experimenting and iterating on just one of the most important issues of our time. Thank you for your body of work, and thank you for joining us here today.
Fantastic. And it was a joy to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.